welcome back. Today I'm going to be bringing you my tight end ranking for the 2026 draft. If you do enjoy the content, please consider liking and subscribing. It would be very much appreciated. Now let's jump into it. At 6, I've got Justin Joly out of NC State, and I've got a day 2 evaluation on him. This is a lot of pros for a guy who I have at 6, and it's true that I like a lot of what he does. It's a smaller frame at 6'3", but Joly's 241 pounds makes him pretty compact. I don't think he's a natural blocker, often going for the shoulder block, but when he does do that, it seems appropriately timed and well executed. Plus, when he gets his hands involved, the technique doesn't seem a disaster. The arms are 32 inches and a quarter, so a touch on the short side, as a lot of the prospects in this video are, but he extends out to the chest and shows enough strength to have an impact. As a receiver, the hips are tight. He's not one who thrives making exaggerated cuts and turns, but as a linear athlete, there's enough speed and he's pretty shifty. As well as this, his feel for space versus zone is really strong, and I think if he found chemistry with his quarterback in the NFL, he could be a fairly productive option. You may be wondering what his major flaw is, and really there isn't one, but whilst I think he could be a solid rotational guy, I don't think I would ever want him as the number one. With him being on the smaller side, he just doesn't flash enough as a receiver. At 5, I've got Kenyon Sadiq out of Oregon. I believe Kenyon Sadiq is a trap. By all accounts, a team is going to draft Sadiq not only in the first round, but quite possibly in the top 15, and the hype makes plenty of sense on paper. He is an absolute freak. At 6'3", 241 pounds, Sadiq is built like a brick, and he ran a ridiculous 4.39 40-yard dash at the combine, the fastest of any tight end ever. He also had the second highest vertical and the third highest broad jump of all time by a tight end. This makes for a catalogue of highlight reel catches downfield, as he is able to not only stretch the field, but also get up and make spectacular grabs outside of his frame. But let's get to the nitty-gritty of what he is on a down-to-down basis. First of all, his athleticism and physical build make him effective as a blocker on wide zone run plays, but in terms of your average down-the-middle run blocking or pass protection, his 31.5-inch arms and poor technique will make him somewhat of a liability at the next level. But that's okay, right? Because we know he's just a freaky tight end receiver hybrid. Well, actually, this is the problem. His route running was super underwhelming to watch. This is not your Colston Loveland, Brock Bowers caliber of receiver. Running in a straight line, he is obviously exceptional, but there is no snap to his breaks. It's very drifty, and honestly, it looks like a combination of tight hips, but also a lack of tenacity and effort, not to mention a 10% drop rate last season. So what I'm saying is I don't see him as the tight end you draft in the first round and stick him in your standard 11 personnel offense, as he becomes your reliable target in the short region, and also does the blocking required as the only tight end on the field. What he could be is someone for a team that likes to run 12 personnel, where you line him up in the slot and use him to stretch the field. Sadiq's athleticism and ability to vary his speed means he thrives when it comes to seam routes and corner routes. He's also someone who, if you can get the ball in his hands, is dangerous after the catch. But this is a specialist role, where he should be in and out of the lineup. I'm not even convinced he fills a hole as the starting tight end in most offenses. At 4, I've got Michael Trigg out of Baylor. Michael Trigg will be 24 by the time he plays in the NFL, and as is often the case, this slight flaw in his draft profile is followed by a more pressing one, which is the injuries that caused him to spend so much time in college. He's faced injury issues throughout his 5 years in which he has spent with USC, Ole Miss, and Baylor for the last 2 years where he made his name. The major concern is his shoulder. In 2022, he broke his collarbone, and maybe this is unrelated, but in week 2 of this season, he reportedly played through a shoulder injury and went on to miss the season finale due to an undisclosed injury. On the field, Trigg is effectively a receiver, despite setting a new record among tight ends at the combine with an 84 3/8 wingspan. The frame is very skinny, and he consistently allows defenders inside his frame, making his length redundant. As a receiver though, wow. So much to like about what he does. First of all, he didn't run at the combine, but he's a great athlete. The speed and fluidity makes you wonder how well he could move if he dropped 40 pounds and played receiver. But when you combine this with all the savvy he displays, the subtle tricks to find the edge in tight spaces, it makes me want to ignore all the concerns and draft him in the first round. Whether it's the way he varies his speed, the way he contorts his body to disguise the development of the route, he'll discreetly push off when required, or slightly adjust his route on the fly just to find that extra inch of space. With all this in mind, it's important to stay focused on what he's actually going to be. His skinny frame not only makes blocking an issue, but it also limits his consistency as a receiver in the busy region of the field, i.e. the most important part for a tight end. Add on top of this that although his wingspan makes him highly capable of making some terrific catches, some disappointing drops in his film suggest a lack of hand-eye coordination. There's the age, the injury stuff. There's guys who you feel happy to gush about on YouTube, but if I was a GM and my job was on the line, there's a lot that would make me feel uncomfortable being the one to pull the trigger. Moving into my second round evaluations, at 3, I've got Sam Roush out of Stanford. Sam Roush is a well-balanced tight end prospect, offering value both as a blocker and as a receiver. The major disappointment is that despite a 6'6" frame, his arms measure in at 30 inches and 5/8, the third smallest for a tight end since 1999. And whilst of course this makes blocking a challenge for him, he does make up for it. His 267 pounds makes him a real presence, and his technique is excellent. Roush gets low to adjust for his height and generally applies sound footwork in order to combat a lack of length and avoid reaching. But most importantly, in my opinion, is he doesn't allow defenders into his frame. This tight end group is not exactly a masterclass in blocking, partly due to a lack of size, but also due to a lack of technique. And truth is, it doesn't matter if you get low or have clean footwork or reset your hands or any of the technical stuff I'm looking for. As soon as you let the guy inside your frame, that all goes out the window. To avoid this, Roush comes from the inside with his hands and displays good timing, thus already making him a better blocker than most of this class. As expected for someone carrying a lot of mass, he is not a plus athlete. His 4.7 40 time is above average historically for a tight end, but in the modern day it's a little slow and it does show on the field. He is, however, a fluid route runner. Not an amazing one, but his blocking could give him the opportunity to get on the field, maybe even as the starting tight end, and if it's in the right situation with the right quarterback, he finds enough pockets of space to where he could have a productive career. At 2, I've got Eli Stowers out of Vanderbilt. We've already spoken about one athletic freak in this video, and here's the other. Eli Stowers set a new combine record at any position with his 45.5-inch vertical jump and a new record among tight ends with an 11 feet and 3-inch broad jump. His 40-yard dash was a 4.51, which, whilst not as freaky as Kenyon Sadiq, is a phenomenal time for a tight end. Now, I think Stowers provides even less value as a blocker than Sadiq. At 32 and 5/8 inches, the arm length is average, but it's a skinny frame and he doesn't possess the physicality to have an impact in this area. I also have similar frustrations with Stowers as Sadiq in terms of the lack of snap to his route running in the short region. In fact, not only does it seem to be an inability to stop on a dime and make a sharp cut, but he's another one who just seems to give up when he's covered. A big part of what makes a tight end effective is just finding that half a yard in a tight space, whether it's a slight push-off versus man or a sneaky shift into space versus zone. That's a major part of what makes a Travis Kelce or a Trey McBride the reliable underneath target that they are. I'm not seeing that skill from Stowers. What I am seeing is someone who, when the intensity is there, can definitely run a very smooth and fluid vertical route tree. And when I say vertical, I don't necessarily mean 30 yards down the field. I just mean routes where the momentum is forward. He's not having to stop on a dime, because his ability to square up his body, giving the defender no clues on where he's going to go, and then shift his hips and his ankles to pull into space laterally, that's where he thrives. And whilst I found him to be a frustrating watch, because there's a lot of the typical 11 personnel tight end stuff where he's really underwhelming, I do think he is a silky receiver who can really cut into the heart of a defense if the team drafting him has a realistic understanding of what he is and knows how to use him. At 1, and just sneaking into my first round evaluations, it's very on the cusp. I don't know that there would be the destination there for him, but pretty clearly the best tight end in this class, in my opinion, is Max Clare out of Ohio State. Max Clare isn't going to blow you away with athleticism. He's got enough speed to do what he does well, but it's certainly nothing special. However, Clare's got what it takes to be a really good starting tight end. Although his arm length is a bit on the shorter side at 32 and 1/8 inches, he is a reliable blocker. He has a decent build and enough mobility. There are times where I wish he got a bit lower, but his feel for space and understanding of the run design is really good, and he's just a smooth, well-balanced athlete. Where I think he'll be really sneaky is as a receiver. I understand why people get excited about the guys running fast, but even for more of a receiving tight end, high-end speed isn't the first thing you should be looking for. Max Clare has what you should be looking for. Excellent body control, can contort his body and change direction with ease. It is silky smooth with an understanding of how to set his routes up and where to sit down versus zone, and he seems fairly reliable bringing the ball in. I just think he's the perfect balance. A good enough blocker to where he can be relied upon as the lone tight end on a run play, but then you run play action in the exact same formation, and he consistently finds pockets of space and gives the quarterback a dependable option underneath. So the class doesn't blow me away, but there are some solid pieces here. It does seem that, in my opinion, the position is becoming misunderstood with these hybrid receiver type guys. Not to point out the obvious, but the whole point of a tight end is that they can block and run routes. If these guys were playing receiver, they would be on the outside. They don't have the elusiveness that the shorter guys have to play in the slot. But a big chunk of the production for most tight ends is the fact that they're hard to pick up because you don't know if they're going to be blocking or receiving. For me, the only guy who fits that mold and does so at a high level is Max Clare. But that's all from me. If you did enjoy the content, please consider liking and subscribing. It would be very much appreciated. I'll be bringing you running backs next, so stay tuned for that, and I'll see you next time.